It's 9th November 2012. Zulu Sierra Papa India is conducting a night VFR flight into Polokwane International Airport. At 21 nautical miles southwest of the airport, he encounters inclement weather. The pilot then decides to descend, but this puts him in direct contact with terrain. Find out what happens next on this episode of Lesotho's Pride. The pilot is a 24-year-old male. At the time, he held a private pilot license airplane with 194 hours total time, and he had 158.3 hours of time on the aircraft type. The pilot was also a student, completing his hour building towards his commercial pilot license. The aircraft he was flying was a Cessna 172 Romeo. It had flown a total of approximately 8,126 hours since its date of manufacture in 1998. Its MPI, Certificate of Release, and Certificate of Airworthiness were all valid at the time of the event. The aircraft was also operating under Part 141 operations. At approximately 16:28 Zulu, the pilot had called up the Polokwane Tower, asking if the runway lights would be on. The tower controller responded saying that the lights are permanently on. However, the controller did caution the pilot that the weather is not so good and recommended to him that he should reconsider his flight. The pilot planned to depart Vondubum Airport and climb to an initial altitude of flight level 075. Upon doing so, he would route for Wambafs, then Nalstrom, then Polokwane Airport for a touch and go. After his touch and go, he will route directly back to Vondubum Airport. His estimated total flight time would be 3 hours and 10 minutes. Just before the Polokwane Tower controller's shift had ended at 1800 Zulu, the pilot had called him up once again, asking how the weather conditions were. The controller responded and stated that, well, it is still VMC, visual meteorological conditions. However, the visibility was at 8,000 meters. The cloud ceiling was at 2,000 feet AGL, and that it was actually overcast. Vondubum Airport elevation is at 4,095 feet, whereas Polokwane International Airport elevation is at 4,076 feet. Weather reports at the time indicated that there was a low-level scattered cloud with a cloud ceiling of around 1,000 feet overhead Polokwane Airport. There was also poor visibility and low-level moderate turbulence. At 1800 Zulu, the dew point depression had actually decreased by 2 degrees Celsius. This indicated, or we can assume, that it meant the cloud base had dropped by either 500 feet or 1,000 feet. Looking at Google Maps, we can average out the elevation of the ground between Vondubum Airport and Polokwane International Airport, which ranged between 4,000 and 5,300 feet. So this 4,000 and 5,300 feet is along his routing. Now, in terms of the clearance that he required below cloud base, he needed a minimum clearance of 500 feet. This meant that the pilot only had a cloud clearance of 1,500 feet down to 300 feet between the ground and the cloud ceiling. Now, even with this information at hand, the pilot had elected to take off. At 17:58 Zulu, he had taken off from Vondubum Airport, and the tower controller had cleared him to climb up to 7,500 feet above mean sea level. We can assume that he took off from runway 29, considering the winds aloft. He then routed towards Wambafs, and upon reaching Wambafs, he elected to route directly for Polokwane Airport, skipping Nalstrom altogether. By doing so, it placed his aircraft directly above higher terrain, but even then, when he directed towards Polokwane, his initial heading selection was 4 nautical miles off track. It is unknown whether this diversion was planned, but even then his true track selection should have been 045 degrees true to Polokwane. After a series of incorrect heading changes at 21 nautical miles southwest of Polokwane Airport, he began a shallow rate of descent. Upon doing this, he did a left-hand turn orbit, and after completing the left-hand turn orbit, he began a right turn off track. His descent continued. As his descent continued, this put him in direct conflict with higher terrain. Unfortunately, upon doing so, his aircraft impacted the mountain. The next morning, the Von de Boom Tower controller called up Polokwane Tower. He asked, "Is Zulu Sierra Sierra Papa India there at Polokwane International Airport?" The answer was a resounding no. The Search and Rescue Coordination Center had already been notified the night before when the pilot had failed to cancel his search and rescue. The Coordination Center had also notified SAPS, the South African Police Service, as well as EMS, which is the Emergency Medical Services. So at 8:15 Zulu, a SAPS helicopter had departed looking for the aircraft. Unfortunately, due to inclemental weather, the search had to be called off and subsequently delayed. At 09:25 Zulu, they had started their search again, looking for the aircraft. The SAPS helicopter did manage to identify the crash location, and upon close inspection, there seemed to be no signs of life. The helicopter quickly returned to collect EMS as well as SAPS crew, and once they returned back to the accident site, it was very clear that the pilot and the passenger on board were both pronounced dead on scene. So what caused this crash? Upon closer inspection at the student's coaching report, it was found that he was quite eager to finish off his commercial pilot license and return home. In addition to that, he had completed about 17 hours of instrument flying time in the simulator. The combination of his impatience as well as his potential overconfidence that he had in the simulator may have led him to cloud his judgment when deciding to take off with inclemental weather. In addition to his impatience as well as his potential overconfidence, it was quite clear that he had a poor flight planning as well as execution of his flight plan. He had initially elected to climb to flight level 075, but if he were to look at the terrain clearance requirement for that particular flight, he actually needed to fly at flight level 095. But of course, due to the weather, he was not allowed to do that in VFR conditions, visual flight rule conditions. This alone should have led him to decide to cancel his flight. The other point is in relation to his diversion overhead bomb baths. We do not know till this day the reason behind it. However, it is somewhat clear, or we can somewhat assume, that he was probably using some form of handheld GPS device. Now, just to go off at a little bit of a tangent, if we actually go to the US and look at that training philosophy, for you to complete your commercial pilot license there, they focus more so on your motor skills than your navigational skills. This means that GPS is widely used there versus the teaching philosophy that of the UK and subsequently that of South Africa. Now in South Africa, the focus is more so on your navigational skills than your motor skills. So in the US, you are free to use a GPS device. In fact, you're probably encouraged to use a GPS device, considering that a lot of the technology on board aircraft today utilize quite complex GPS systems. So if you do not know how to use them, this is why they encourage you to learn early on the different functions, the different features of GPS system. So with the training philosophy in South Africa, the focus is more so on your navigational skills. Therefore, you go back to the days of compass, watch, and a map, particularly for your private pilot license training. The last point I wanted to make is that on that particular night, there was actually no full moon. I can tell you this from my experience flying at night with a full moon overhead Bloemfontein coming into Bram Fischer International Airport. There is a particular patch of ground which there is no town, and so even with a moon it was actually quite difficult to see where the terrain was. I was hyper focused on maintaining the key altitudes that I required in coming into the airport. So with this particular scenario, this individual was experiencing no full moon, and likely where he was flying there was no particular town, so he could not really see any lights on the ground, so you couldn't really see where the elevation started and where it ended with regards to a mountain. So what can we learn from this accident report? I would like to turn to the notes provided by Jim, who is quite a renowned pilot instructor in the South African aviation industry. And he says the following: you should never fly when you are in a hurry or under pressure. You often can't see bad weather at night, so it's critical to make weather decisions on the ground. Night flying should be with a visible horizon and at least half a moon, but it's actually not illegal to not fly with a moon. I could be stand corrected. If you do know the answer to that, please mention it in the comment section below. You must be able to navigate using identifiable objects on the ground. This is with regards to VFR flying, of course. A night rating earned in city lighting is likely to kill you. He is basically saying if you do not train or do some aspect of training with night flying with a sparsely populated region, then doing it only with city lighting surrounding you is quite dangerous. Flight logs and lines on maps are primary navigational tools. GPS may be used as a backup. If you divert, tell someone, otherwise search and rescue is meaningless. This is actually a very good point. I'm not sure if he did notify air traffic control on his routing or information actually on his routing if he is diverting. The bit of instrument flying that you need for a night rating does not qualify you to fly in cloud or on a black night. Instructors, be very aware of your responsibilities when assigning pupils out, particularly at night. I know an instructor who killed, not me, but him. I know an instructor who killed three pupils before the CAA finally shut him down. Flight planning is important during the day and critical at night. And if strobes and beacons are distracting, switch them off. These are some important points that Jim has notified us about this accident report. I think it's good for all of us pilots at any experience level to remember these during our flying, but particularly for those who are doing the PPL, for those who are doing the hour building towards their commercial pilot license. Thank you very much, guys, for watching this episode of Lesotho's Pride. This is a new angle that I am taking. I would like to be covering a number of general aviation accidents that have occurred in South Africa. I think this is actually a great learning opportunity. These accidents have been widely covered, obviously by the Civil Aviation Authority itself, but also by a number of experienced pilots and instructors who have written in various magazines and other notable magazines, South African aviation magazines. However, I feel as if there isn't much of this content that is provided on a video platform. We can see this in the European market, we can see this in the North American market for both general aviation as well as for commercial aviation, but it's not quite really seen here in the Southern African market. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm looking forward to creating more of this type of content. This is a transitional phase for the channel, as I'm not going to be doing much flying at this point, as I'm focusing more so on the briefings for my instructor's course. Thanks guys for watching again, and I'll catch you next time.